Retirement income planning really starts with modeling the liabilities. In essence, just how much is a retiree going to need over their entire lifetime. So what I've done to be able to do that is to create a spreadsheet based in part on Sam Basu's age banding methodology. And so I'm going to take this recording and I'm going to talk about this. What in essence we've done is to create a pro forma or a projected estimate of the expenses out to say 100 or 105, and then we're going to discount these back. Let's start from the very beginning, however. So if you look over on the left side of the sheet, what I've done is I've just done some rough estimates of expenses, and I've put them into categories. So as you can see, I start over here with basic expenses. These are going to be the expenses that you're going to have on a day-to-day basis. So think of them as recurring expenses. Housing, mortgage expense, insurance for the house, maintenance of the house, things like that. But they're recurring. They're normal sorts of things. We have food. Now think of this as groceries, liquor that you're going to be consuming in the house. Transportation, cars, parking, fuel. Technology is basically your computer, internet, the sorts of things that you use at home. And then personal expenses. Who knows? These are whatever. Another category that Basu uses or others will use will be giving. Do you give to charity? Do you tithe? At the end of life, is there going to be a gift? So that becomes another item. Healthcare is a big area, especially as a retiree ages. That's going to start off fairly low as a percentage of total spending. By the time you get to be 85, it becomes the dominating source of expenses. Leisure expenses. So for here, what I've done is to start off with normal insurance, what a working person will be paying for, for maybe prescriptions, other things, dental, vision. What's going to happen then is when you go to retirement, that's going to shift more towards the Medicare, Medigap, and then any other expenses. So there'll be an initial drop, and then there'll be an increase again over time. Leisure is also, you can think of it as discretionary. You can add to this one. I've made it simple. I've just said initially, you've got a fairly low budget for annual vacations, trips, but again, a retiree, especially, whether you're married or not, a retiree tends to, in those first few years, have some freedom to be able to do the things that they hadn't been able to do, especially take trips. So we always assume there's going to be a large jump in the budget, and then there's going to be a dramatic cut at some point when the retiree is unable to travel anymore. So we're going to build that in. Taxes. This is a really important component that you have to address. While you're still working, in this case, over 25% of the expenses are consumed by federal and state taxes, working taxes. This is going to be what's withheld for Social Security, for Medicare, for disability insurance, etc. And then I threw in property taxes. Here, of course, property taxes could also go into housing expenses. And then whatever's left over, again, something that people need to consider is how much do you put, or how much does the retiree, how much have they been saving in their 401k, in their work pension plan? Because when they stop working, they're not going to be saving anymore. So in this case, we're going to assume that once somebody goes into retirement, they're going to start dissaving. They're going to start pulling money out. So that savings will go to zero. In the same way, taxes are going to drop dramatically. So these are the base things that we're going to be working with. So in this case, we've got a fairly well-heeled client. And if you add up all their expenses, the housing is the biggest ticket item, absorbing over a quarter of the total bill at $42,000. Well, if you think about it, $3,000 a month in mortgage payments, it's not a very big amount of money. So you can see how it all adds up. So if I sum up everything, I've got about $166,000 of what's being spent pre-retirement. So we're going to want to know how much that's going to translate into once you start actually working. So if you look over here at number 2, the second area, what I've done is to consolidate each of these items. So under the basic or day-to-day living category, if I add everything up, I've got about $73,000. The reason that we consolidate is A, it just makes it easier to run through the spreadsheet, but B is the area of inflation. So what's going to happen is in the area of basic expenses, the inflation rate of what's going to be going from year to year to year, well, your housing costs are pretty much fixed from year to year. At least mortgage is relatively fixed. Property taxes are going to go up some, insurance is going to go up some, utilities will go up some, but they're not going to go up nearly as much as, say, the CPI. Same thing with food or transportation. The costs are going to go up, but the consumer can always substitute. There's a lot of substitutability, which is going to mitigate a lot of the inflation effects. So in this case, I've put down 2.5%. If I wanted to, I could change this and go to 2%. It's going to lower things a little bit. So you can adjust things. I've put the annual giving for $4,000. I'm just going to grow that at the inflation rate, 2%. Healthcare, as I discussed earlier, is going to have a higher inflation rate. Even though it's initially going to come down when you go to Medicare, when the client goes on to Medicare, it's going to rise pretty quickly over time, and it's going to become, again, the dominating influence by the time you're in your 80s. So in this case, I'm using 5%. Leisure or discretionary, by the very nature of the beast, the fact that it's a discretionary item, people will often, they'll do their shopping, but then once you get fixated on, well, I would like to do this. I'd like to take a trip to Africa or Antarctica, and I want to do it well. It's a little bit different item than it is when you're still working, in that, you start to say, I've earned this. So you're willing to pay a little more on that inflation rate. So I'm going to say 5%. Again, discretion. A person can change how much they spend with respect to discretionary expenses. You can say, I'm done traveling. My body, my knees won't let me. Health reasons are the biggest issue. Or I've already taken care of most of my bucket list. So there'll be a time when leisure will come up, and then it'll drop way back. Taxes, we're going to assume will rise along with the CPI. It's just kind of to reflect the fact that you're going to have some earnings that will go up. Your Social Security, if you have investment earnings. So we're just going to stick that at 2%. And like I said, savings, well, there are no savings. We're going to be dis-saving. There is one other item that I will discuss later called big ticket. I'm going to ignore it for the moment as I walk through the age banding for everything else, but then I'm going to add that back in. Now what you're going to see is over here where I created an adjustment category. And what adjustment does is it says, okay, I've gone from working to non-working. I've gone to retirement. So a lot of my expenses are now going to be changing. So again, the day-to-day expenses, certain things that you're not going to be doing that you were doing during working. Lunches out, work clothes. Now, there's a lot of things, driving back and forth to work. There's enough that's going to add up that you're going to see a little bit of a drop in the day-to-day living. So I'm going to reduce everything to 90% of what it was pre-retirement. Contributions, I'm going to keep it the same. Healthcare, because of the shift to Medicare, I'm going to assume that the costs go down on healthcare to 80% of what they were. You would have to work this out, of course, with your client. Leisure, as I said, will go up, and it might go up by 50%. Now, this isn't, in this particular client's case, leisure is starting off fairly low. So I think a 50% increase, primarily trips, things that the clients always wanted to do, I think that's pretty justifiable. So I'm going to make a 50% increase. In the same way, taxes are going to go down by 50%. It might even go down more depending on your client's status. So you can see how we've made these adjustments. Okay, so what we had at the time of retirement was expenses of roughly $166,000. And now that we've made our adjustments during the first years of retirement, you can see a rather significant drop in the expenses, down to $123,000. So you can see how much of a shift is going to happen. Now, we're going to continue with these adjustments. We're going to let everything move forward over the next 9 years, from 66 through 74. And when the client hits 75, we're going to go through this process. Again, sorry, I swallowed wrong. Now you're going to notice right here a drop in the basics. What I've done is to reflect the fact that in this case, the client's mortgage is paid off. So now you can reduce by $36,000 a year on that element. And now everything will continue to go through with all the other basic expenses rising. So if there are items that have a limited duration, you're going to want to reflect those at some point. And it's pretty much always going to be somewhere in basic, unless the client has been saving, putting extra money away for long-term care insurance or something else, and then decides they're going to let the policy ride on its own, then that might go into healthcare. But you get the idea. If there's something that's of a known horizon, then you want to make an adjustment when those payments are going to stop. So in this case, the client's going to have their expenses running through to age 74, inflating at our inflation rate. For those of you who don't use Excel very well, here's the formula up at the top. You can see up here where I've just indicated at the top. But this is the formula that you're going to use. You're just going to grow everything by 1 plus the inflation rate. Okay? So we proceed all the way through age 74, and now we make another adjustment. I'm going to move my spreadsheet a little bit, and we're going to say at this point, now the client's at that, we started off with the go-go, and now we're going to the slow-go period. So the clients' day-to-day spending is going to fall down a little bit. They're using a little bit less. They're still willing to contribute things. Healthcare is going to start to move up. Okay, it went up. It went down initially, but now it's going to see a 10% increase over the next 10 years. So we're going to take a bump. So at age 74, annual healthcare costs were $26,000. I'm going to now bump that by 10%. So age 75, it's going to go up to $28,600. You can see that adjustment. By the same token, we're going to slow go from go-go. Travel's going to be the thing that's going to drop. Now, this is discretionary travel. If there's travel for family things, to see children, to go to, I hate to say it, to go to relatives' funerals, etc., that's part of the daily living. So these elements, the discretionary, are things that you might do or you might not do. Okay, there's no obligation. So we're going to assume there's a cut by half, 50% during the slow go period. Taxes, they're really not going to change just because you've gone from 74 to 75 years old. So now we go through this whole grow at the inflation rate once again element until we get to 85. And then we make our final adjustments over here. So now I'm going to make an assumption that a client may easily be downsizing, putting some of the assets elsewhere. They're going to be really into the no-go, from go-go to slow-go to no-go. So their day-to-day living is really going to be far more limited. So I'm taking it down by another 60%. In the same way, I have now reduced giving down to 50%, just because there's not that much somebody do. I could always increase it, say 1, and move it back up to 100%. The big adjustment is right here, healthcare. And now I've increased it by 40%. I'm saying, okay, from here on out, there's a much greater chance that the client is going to need home health care. Oftentimes, in the income bracket that this client was in, their annual spending was $160,000. They may well have been self-funding for long-term care insurance. Now they're going to have to start withdrawing some of those assets. So you might have one of the spouses is going to need far more frequent health care in a facility, whether a nursing home or just an extended convalescence facility. Regardless, healthcare is going to cost dramatically more, take much more of the budget, so I'm increasing it by 40% at this stage of the game. By the same token, we're going to be cutting back discretionary or leisure spending down to just a quarter of what it was when you were 84. So you can see these trade-offs that are going on. Taxes, they don't stop. So you can see what I've done is to project everything out till the client is age 100. Now let's talk about the next item that we added, the big ticket item. And I'm going to go over to this tab that I call big ticket and give you a sense of the kind of things that might go on. So you're working with your client. The client says, at a stage, I'm going to remodel the kitchen in my house. It was built in the early 70s. God, we need to remodel it. So let's budget to have a remodeling. Let's assume that it's going to cost $75,000 down the road. So 4 or 5 years out. I'm going to need a new roof, maybe. Or to fix the roof, I might need a new furnace. you see the idea of the sorts of things that are going to go on. A client might say, I'm going to need a new car, and you might say it's going to be limited duration, but I'm going to need to budget for that car starting out in a couple years, and I'm going to be making payments for 4 years. So we can build that in. Client says, I want to buy a boat. So you get a sense of these things. The same thing, I might take a very large trip to Africa or to Antarctica. Again, you can add these. In this case, I've added a couple of items of pre-planned gifts. In this case, single premium annuities that the client will fund up front, pay the cash, and then we would see the balance of that would come into the income section to fund, say, a gift, an inheritance, or to make a life insurance policy, again, for when they die. So that's, in this case, the client is pre-funding their legacy to their family in year, what is this, year 5 or 6 years. After retirement, they're going to go ahead and fund everything. So we build all those in under big ticket item over here, and I've added it to the cost. Now I'm assuming, of course, that the client is going to be kind of pre-saving for it, but I want to put everything in here because you're going to need, again, you want to look at the liabilities. So what this row does is to show the sum of all the expenses. Now you can see initially in the go-go years, especially in this particular year with the big gift, that the expenses are fairly high. And then what you can see is that the expenses will drop, then they'll slowly grow at the inflation rates, and then they may drop again, and then they're going to continue to grow over time. But these are nominal dollars. And in the end of the day, what we're going to do is we're going to be comparing the expenses with the invested or the investable assets, financial assets, and other assets, so that you can look for the shortfall. What is it that needs to be funded? Hence the idea of retirement income planning. So what we do down here is we use a discount rate. I'm using 4%. The reason I use 4% is that it's what the annuity, the insurance industry, would normally use to discount their annuity payments or to create a price for the annuity. Now, this comes from using treasuries. So I could say in year 1, I could discount it at the 1-year treasury bill rate. For the first 5 years or 3 years, I could use T-bill rates. And then I start moving to treasury note rates for 5 years up to 10. But remember, those treasury notes and the bills and bonds, the rates are going to rise. Okay? We're assuming a normal positive curve. And if I averaged and used a weighted average of all those rates, I'm going to come around somewhere between 3.5% and 4% on average. So for simplicity's sake, I'm going to use just a discount rate of 4%. Now remember, our formula for present value is the dollars up here, $123,000, divided by 1 plus the discount rate to the nth, whatever the period is. So I put down, this is year 1, 2, 3, year 9. So what in essence I've got is the present value of $116,000 in year 9 is going to be $81,500. So again, you see the process of what's going on. the final step then is to just sum all the present values. And in this case, it would be $2.7 million is how much my total liability stream is going to be over the next 40 years, or 35 years. And this is what now I'm going to need to compare against my assets so that I can compute whatever the shortfall is. I might want to change something. I might say, okay, maybe that pre-funding of the gift, I'm going to say, I don't need to do that. Instead of a gift, it's going to just be the residue, whatever's left over. So I'm going to plug a 0 in there instead. And now, instead of 2.7, it only comes down to 2.57. So there's a little bit of a change, but it isn't a dramatic change. So you can play with the spreadsheet. You can work with your clients and kind of get an idea on what might change, what might not change. Again, this is just a tool to help you start the whole process, but it's a really important tool. So use a spreadsheet. It's easy to manage. It's easy to manipulate. The client can see everything that is there, and you can then work through all the steps after that.